The gun appeared so fast, most people didn't even see it happen. 1 second, the plaza was filled with tourists snapping photos. The next, a man in a torn jacket was pointing a weapon directly at the chest of a royal guard standing perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move a single muscle. His name was Sergeant James Harlow, 28 years old, 6 years of service. A man trained to stand motionless for hours, no matter what happened around him. But this wasn't a tourist trying to make him laugh. This wasn't a child waving at him or someone testing his patience. This was different. The man holding the gun was shaking. His hand trembled. His eyes were wild, darting left and right like a cornered animal. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool London air. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Don't move," he hissed. "I swear I'll do it." James didn't respond. His eyes stayed forward. His rifle remained at his side, perfectly still. To anyone watching, he looked like a statue carved from stone. But inside, his heart was pounding. If you love stories like this, real moments that show what people are truly made of, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. The crowd hadn't noticed yet. A few tourists were still laughing nearby, posing for selfies. A street performer was juggling. Her mother was buying ice cream for her children. Normal life continued just meters away, unaware of the deadly standoff happening in plain sight. The man with the gun stepped closer. His breath came fast and shallow. He pressed the barrel harder against James's chest. The cold metal pushed through the thick red uniform fabric. "I said, don't move." His voice rose, desperate and angry. James could smell the man's fear. Alcohol. Days without bathing. Desperation. This wasn't a terrorist. This wasn't some planned attack. This was something else, something more dangerous. A desperate man with nothing to lose. Finally, someone in the crowd noticed. A woman gasped. Then another person pointed. Within seconds, chaos erupted. People screamed. Parents grabbed their children. Tourists ran in every direction, phones still in their hands, trying to capture the moment even as they fled. But James didn't run. Couldn't run. Stood there perfectly still, while panic swirled around him. The man's finger moved to the trigger. "Look at me!" he screamed. "Look at me!" James's training was clear. Don't break protocol. Don't engage. Don't move unless lives are in immediate danger. Wait for backup. Stay calm. But this wasn't a training exercise. This was real. Backup was still 30 seconds away. 30 seconds is a lifetime when a gun is pressed against your chest. The man's eyes filled with tears. His jaw clenched. His whole body was shaking now, not just his hand. He looked broken. Shattered. Like someone who had reached the very end of their rope and decided to take one last stand against the world. "You don't even see me, do you?" the man whispered. "None of you ever see us." For the first time, James's eyes moved, just slightly. Just enough to look directly at the man holding the gun, and in that moment, everything changed. The man's expression shifted. Surprise flickered across his face. Because for the first time in what might have been years, someone was truly looking at him. Not through him, not past him, but at him. "I see you," James said quietly. 3 words. It's all it took. The man's hand wavered. His finger loosened on the trigger. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Years of pain seemed to flash across his face in seconds. Rejection, loneliness, rage, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. Then the police arrived, and everything happened at once. Armed officers swarmed the plaza from 3 directions. Shouts filled the air. Red laser sights dotted the man's chest and forehead. At least 6 weapons were now aimed at him instead of just one pressed against James. "Drop the weapon. Drop it now." The man's eyes went wide. He looked around at the circle of police closing in, then back at James. The guard's face remained calm, but his eyes held something different now. It's not fear, not anger, understanding. "Put it down," James said softly, his voice barely audible over the shouting officers. "It doesn't have to end like this." The man's shoulders slumped. His arm lowered slowly, inch by inch, until the gun pointed at the ground instead of at James's chest. His fingers opened. The weapon clattered onto the stone plaza with a metallic sound that echoed across the suddenly silent courtyard. Within seconds, officers tackled him to the ground. Hands pulled behind his back. Cuffs clicked shut. Someone kicked the gun away. The man didn't resist. He simply lay there, face pressed against the cold stone, and wept. James stood at attention, exactly as he had before. His face showed nothing. His breathing was controlled. To anyone who hadn't witnessed what just happened, he looked like he'd been standing there peacefully all along. But his hands were shaking, just slightly. Just enough that he had to clench them tighter around his rifle to hide it. An officer approached him. "Sergeant Harlow? Are you injured?" "No, sir. We need you to step back. We need to secure the area." James nodded but didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed on the man being lifted from the ground, guided toward a police van. The man looked back over his shoulder, meeting James's gaze one last time. His mouth formed words that James couldn't hear over the noise, but he understood them anyway. "Thank you." The next 3 hours passed in a blur. Medical checks, statements, interviews, officers asking the same questions over and over. What did he say? How long was the gun pointed at you? Did he make any threats? Were there accomplices? James answered each question mechanically. Professional, precise, but his mind was somewhere else. When they finally released him, the sun was setting. The plaza had been cleared. Crime scene tape marked where the confrontation had happened. A small blood stain from the man's face hitting. The pavement had been washed away, but still left a dark spot on the stone. James walked to the barracks in silence. His other guards congratulated him, slapped his back, called him a hero, nodded and thanked them, but felt nothing. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying those final moments. The look in that man's eyes, the desperation, the pain. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. His chest still felt the phantom pressure of that gun barrel. His ears still heard that broken voice saying, "You don't even see me." He'd followed protocol, done everything right. But something about the encounter had shaken him deeper than any training exercise or ceremonial duty ever had. Who was that man? What had driven him to such a desperate act? Questions haunted him. 3 days later, James was called to the commanding officer's office. He stood at attention, expecting commendation, or perhaps another round of questions. Instead, his coat handed him a folder. "We thought you should know," the officer said. "The man's name is Marcus Webb, 42 years old, former soldier, served in Afghanistan." James's stomach dropped. He was dishonorably discharged 3 years ago after a mental health crisis. Lost his pension, lost his family, been homeless since then, living on the streets. The CO paused. The gun wasn't loaded. "Harlow." The time seemed to stop. "What?" "No bullets, not one." Forensics confirmed it. He knew it wasn't loaded. James sat down without being dismissed. His legs suddenly felt weak. "He wasn't trying to hurt you," the CO continued quietly. "He was trying to make someone notice him. To make someone see him as a human being instead of invisible trash on the street." The officer closed the folder. He told the investigators he chose a Royal Guard specifically because he wanted to see. If someone trained to ignore the world could still choose to see him, to acknowledge him. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. "And you did," the CO said. "You broke protocol. You engaged. You looked at him. And according to the psychiatric evaluation, that simple act may have saved his life. He was planning to provoke the police into shooting him, suicide by cop. But when you spoke to him, when you saw him, something changed." James's throat felt tight. He couldn't speak. "Marcus Webb is currently receiving psychiatric care. Long-term treatment? The military is covering it since he's a veteran. He's going to get the help he should have received years ago." The CO placed a hand on James's shoulder. "Because you made a choice, though. You broke the rules to do the right thing." James left the office in a daze. The London streets looked different now. Every homeless person he passed, every face in the crowd, every person society had trained him not to see. They were all Marcus Webb, all invisible, all desperate to be acknowledged, and James couldn't ignore them anymore. 2 weeks passed. James returned to duty, but something had fundamentally changed inside him. He stood at his post each day, rifle at his side, red uniform crisp and perfect. Tourists still took photos. Children still tried to make him smile. Life continued as it always had. But now, during his breaks, James did something different. He started walking the streets, not in uniform. Just jeans and a jacket. Anonymous. Invisible in his own way. He walked through neighborhoods most people avoided. Past alleys where homeless people slept in cardboard boxes. Through parks where forgotten veterans sat on benches, staring at nothing. Along bridges where the desperate sometimes stood too long, looking down at the dark water below, and he talked to them. Not as a soldier, not as a guard. Just as James. Mind if I sit? He'd asked, some ignored him. Some told him to leave. But some tired, broken, invisible people would look up in surprise, because someone had asked permission. Someone had seen them. An old woman named Sarah told him about losing her daughter to cancer and her home to medical debt. A young man named Tommy described being discharged from the army with PTSD and no support system. A teenage girl named Lisa explained how she'd run from an abusive home only to find the streets were worse. Each story was different. Each face was unique. But they all shared the same thing. They'd all been invisible for too long. James couldn't fix their problems. He couldn't give them homes or erase their trauma. But he could do one thing. He could see them. One evening, 3 weeks after the incident, James was sitting on a bench near Westminster Bridge. Next to him sat an elderly man with a scraggly beard and fingerless gloves. They'd been talking for 20 minutes about nothing important. Weather, football, small things that made the man smile. "You're that guard," the old man said suddenly. James looked at him. Surprised? "What?" "From the news. The one who talked down that bloke with the gun. I saw your face on the telly." The man studied him. "You're different now. I can tell how you see us. Most people look right through, but you actually see." The old man's eyes were watery but sharp. "That's rare. That's special." James didn't know what to say. "My name's Arthur," the man said, extending a dirty hand. "Been on these streets 9 years? You're the first person in uniform who's treated me like a human in all that time." They shook hands. Arthur's grip was surprisingly strong. "What happened to you?" James asked. "If you don't mind sharing," Arthur leaned back on the bench, staring up at the darkening sky. "Lost my wife to Alzheimer's. Spent everything on her care. When she passed, I had nothing left. No savings. No home. No family." He paused. "But the hardest part wasn't losing everything. It was becoming invisible. Walking past hundreds of people every day who wouldn't even look at me. Like I'd stopped being real." James understood that feeling now. That desperate need to be seen. To be acknowledged as human. "You served, didn't you?" Arthur asked. "How'd you know?" "Takes one to know one." "Royal Marines?" "Army King's Guard." Arthur nodded slowly. "We take care of our own, don't we? Or at least we're supposed to." His voice grew bitter. "But sometimes the system forgets about us. Leaves us behind." James thought about Marcus Webb. About all the others like him. What if we changed that? James said suddenly. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Changed what?" "The system. What if we created something that actually helps? A place where veterans who've been forgotten can find support. Real support. Not just paperwork and appointments, but people who understand, who've been there." "It's a nice dream, son. But dreams don't feed hungry stomachs or warm, cold nights." "Then let's make it real." Arthur studied him for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "You're serious?" "I am. You'll need money, resources, a location. Permission from about a dozen different agencies." Arthur ticked off each obstacle on his fingers. "You'll face bureaucracy and red tape and people who don't want to help because it's easier to ignore us." "I know. I do it." James thought about that gun pressed against his chest, about Marcus's desperate eyes, about all the invisible people he'd talked to over the past few weeks, because someone has to see them, really see them. And maybe, just maybe, I can help others see them too. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, joints creaking. Well then, soldier, you've got your first volunteer. I may be old and homeless, but I still know every veteran on these streets. And I can tell you right now, they need this. We all do. They shook hands again. This time, it felt like a promise. James didn't know it then, but that handshake would change everything. Not just for him. Not just for Arthur, but for hundreds of invisible people who'd been waiting years for someone to finally see them the next morning. James requested a meeting with his commanding officer. He had a proposal. It was ambitious. Maybe impossible. But he had to try, because once you truly see the invisible, you can't unsee them. And you can't walk away. The commanding officer listened to James's proposal without interrupting. When James finished, there was a long silence. You want to start a veteran outreach program? The CO said slowly. Using military resources and facilities to help homeless former soldiers? Yes, sir. Harlow, do you have any idea how many regulations you'd be violating? How many chains of command you'd need approval from? Yes, sir. Approximately 17 different departments, according to my research. The CO almost smiled. You've done your homework. This matters, sir. These are our brothers and sisters. People who served their country and got left behind.
Ow.
James leaned forward. Marcus Webb should never have been on those streets. Neither should the hundreds of others out there right now. We have the resources. We have the facilities. We just need to care enough to use them. The CO studied him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Give me a week, he said. I'll make some calls. I'm not promising anything, but I'll try. That week felt like a month. James continued his routine standing guard, walking the streets, talking to the invisible. Each conversation reinforced why this mattered. Each story added weight to his determination. Arthur introduced him to more veterans, men and women who'd served in conflicts from the Falklands to Afghanistan. People who'd given everything for their country only to receive nothing in return. One was a woman named Patricia, who'd been a combat medic. She slept under a bridge and still suffered from nightmares about the soldiers she couldn't save. Another was Robert, a former sniper who'd lost an arm and his entire support network when he returned home changed by war. They all had the same question. Why do you care? And James always gave the same answer, because I see you. On the 8th day, James was called back to the CO's office. His heart pounded as he entered. The officer's face was unreadable. Sit down, Sergeant. Sat. I called in every favor I had. Spoke to people I haven't talked to in 20 years. Made promises I hope I can keep. The CO paused. And I got approval. Provisional, limited, with about 100 conditions attached. But approval nonetheless. James's breath caught. Sir, you have 6 months. A trial program. We're repurposing an old barracks facility in East London. 50 beds. Basic medical services, counseling, job training resources, and you're going to run it, me, sir. You started this, you finish it, you'll have a small staff, limited budget, and the entire military bureaucracy watching to see if you fail. The CO's expression softened slightly. Don't fail, Harlow. A lot of people are counting on you. People who don't even know it yet. James stood, saluted crisply. I won't, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. Make it work. The next 2 months were chaos. James had to learn skills they'd never taught him in military training. How to manage budgets, how to hire staff, how to navigate social services and healthcare systems, how to turn an abandoned building into a place of hope. Arthur became his right-hand man. The old veteran knew the streets and the people on them. He knew who needed help most, who could be trusted, who was ready to accept assistance. Together, they recruited a team. A former Army nurse named Helen, who'd been treating homeless people for free. A psychologist named Dr. Patel, who specialized in PTSD. A job. Counselor named Jennifer, who believed everyone deserved a second chance. They called it the guardhouse. A place where invisible veterans could finally be seen. Word spread slowly at first. Suspicious men and women would approach cautiously, expecting judgment or bureaucracy. Instead, they found warm meals, clean beds, people who understood what they'd been through because they'd been through it too. Patricia was one of the first to arrive. She stood in the doorway, a small bag containing everything she owned in her hand, and tears streaming down her face. "Is this real?" she whispered. "It's real," James said. "Welcome home." By the end of the first month, every bed was full. By the end of the second month, they had a waiting list. Veterans who'd been invisible for years were suddenly being seen, being helped, being given the support they should have received from the beginning, but success brought new challenges. One night, James was working late in his office when he heard shouting from the residential wing. He ran down the corridor and found two men facing off. One was Robert, the former sniper. The other was a newer resident named David. "He stole my stuff," David shouted. "I didn't touch your stuff," Robert fired back. James stepped between them. Everyone calmed down. "What happened?" David pointed at Robert's bunk. "My watch. My father's watch. I left it by my bed, and now it's gone. And I saw him near my area earlier." Robert's face went red. "I'm not a thief. I was a soldier. I have honor. So was I. And someone still stole from me." The tension in the room was explosive. Other residents were gathering, taking sides. This was exactly the kind of situation that could destroy everything they'd built. Trust was fragile, especially among people who'd been betrayed so many times before. James held up his hands. "Nobody moves. We're going to figure this out together. David, show me exactly where you left the watch." For the next hour, James methodically searched. He checked every bunk, every locker, every common area. The residents watched in tense silence. Finally, in the small gap between David's mattress and the bed frame, James found it. The watch had simply fallen through. David's face crumbled. "Oh God," I accused him. "I'm so sorry." Robert stood rigid, arms crossed. "Yeah, you did." "Robert," James said quietly, "he made a mistake. We all do. Easy for you to say. You have a life. A career, respect." Robert's voice shook. "All I have is my integrity. And he just called me a thief in front of everyone." James understood. When you've lost everything, even your dignity becomes precious. "Worth fighting for?" "David," James said. "Apologize. Properly." David walked up to Robert, hand extended. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Living on the streets so long made me suspicious of everyone. That's not fair to you. I'm truly, truly sorry." Robert stared at the extended hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook it. "We're all healing here," Robert said finally. "I guess that includes learning to trust again." The tension broke. Residents returned to their bunks. Crisis averted. But James knew this was just the beginning. Healing wasn't easy. Trust wasn't simple. And some wounds ran deeper than anyone could see. 3 months into the program. James received an unexpected visitor. He was reviewing job placement reports when Helen knocked on his office door. "James, there's someone here to see you. He says you know him." James looked up. "Who?" "Marcus Webb." Time seemed to freeze. James hadn't seen Marcus since that day in the plaza. Hadn't known if he'd ever see him again. He stood slowly, heart racing. Marcus stood in the lobby, looking completely different. Clean clothes, trimmed hair, clear eyes. But the same nervous energy, the same underlying pain that probably would never fully heal. "Sergeant Harlow," Marcus said quietly. "Just James now. No rank here." James extended his hand. Marcus shook it carefully, like he was afraid it might disappear. "I heard about this place. What you're doing. I had to see it for myself. Marcus looked around the lobby. At the bulletin board covered in job postings and success stories, at the veterans chatting over coffee, at the signs pointing to counseling offices and medical services. This is because of me, isn't it? James chose his words carefully. You opened my eyes, made me see what I'd been trained to ignore. But this exists because a lot of people needed it. The gun wasn't loaded, Marcus said suddenly. They told you that, right? They did. I just wanted someone to see me. To acknowledge I existed, Marcus's voice cracked. I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't be invisible anymore. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. Two men connected by one desperate act that had changed everything. How are you doing? James asked. Better. Therapy helps. Medication helps more. I'm living in transitional housing now. Got a part-time job at a warehouse.
Oh.
Marcus smiled weakly. It's not much, but it's something. More than I've had in years. It's not nothing. That's everything. Marcus looked at him with wet eyes. You saved my life that day. Not by stopping me. By seeing me. By making me feel human again when I'd forgotten I was. He paused. Can I help here? Volunteer or something? I want to give back. To help others who feel like I did. James felt emotion tighten his throat. We'd be honored to have you. Marcus started volunteering 3 days a week. His presence was powerful. He understood the darkness because he'd lived in it. When new residents arrived, broken and hopeless, Marcus could reach them in ways others see. He told them his story. About the gun. About the desperation. About standing at the edge and being pulled back by 3 simple words. I see you. But success brought scrutiny. News reporters wanted stories. Government officials wanted inspections. And not everyone believed in what they were doing. 5 months into the program, James received a formal notice. The Ministry of Defense was sending an evaluation team. If the program didn't meet certain metrics, placement rates, cost efficiency, recidivism statistics, it would be shut down. James called an emergency staff meeting. We have 2 weeks, he told his team. 2 weeks to prove we're worth keeping. We've placed 43 veterans in jobs, Helen said, reading from her notes. We've provided medical treatment to 78 people. We've prevented at least 6 suicides that we know of. How is that not enough? Asterisk, because they measure success in numbers, not lives, Arthur said bitterly. We're not cost-efficient enough. Not neat enough for their spreadsheets. James looked at the faces around the table. Exhausted, dedicated people who'd poured their hearts into this work. Then we show them what we've accomplished. Every success story, every life changed. We make them see these people as humans, not statistics. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. They documented everything. Collected testimonies. Prepared presentations. Patricia told how she'd been homeless for 3 years and now worked as a medical assistant. Robert showed his prosthetic arm and talked about his new job teaching marksmanship. David spoke about rebuilding his relationship with his estranged son. And Marcus stood in front of everyone and told his truth. About the gun. About the desperation. About the second chance that had saved his life. The evaluation day arrived. 3 stern officials in expensive suits walked through the guardhouse, clipboards in hand, expressions unreadable. They asked questions. Reviewed files. Observed group therapy sessions. James watched them with growing dread. These weren't people who understood what it meant to be invisible. They were bureaucrats, looking for reasons to say no. At the end of the day, the lead evaluator woman named Ms. Thornton called James into a private room. Sergeant Harlow, I'll be direct. This program is inefficient. You're spending too much per resident. Your success metrics don't meet departmental standards. And frankly, this entire operation is unconventional to the point of being irregular. James's heart sank. This was it. They were shutting them down. However, Miss Thornton continued, and James's breath caught. I've never seen anything like what you've built here. The loyalty, the community, the genuine healing. She paused. My brother was a veteran. He took his own life 2 years ago because he had nowhere to go. No one to see him. Her professional mask cracked slightly, just enough for James to see the pain underneath. He needed a place like this, she said quietly, and he never got one. She closed her folder. You're getting your funding. Full approval for at least 2 more years, and I'm going to recommend we replicate this model in 3 other cities. James couldn't speak. He simply nodded. But Harlow, she said, standing, don't make me regret this. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep seeing them. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. When she left, James sat alone in the empty room and finally let himself feel. Everything he'd been holding back, relief, gratitude, exhaustion, hope, they'd done it. Against all odds, they'd proven that seeing the invisible mattered, that giving people dignity was worth the cost. Outside, he could hear the residents celebrating. Someone must have overheard the news. Laughter echoed through the halls, the kind of genuine, joyful sound that comes from people who've been given a second chance at life. James walked back into the common area. Arthur was there, a huge smile on his weathered face. We did it, the old man said. No, James replied. You all did it. Every person here did it by refusing to give up, by choosing to be seen. That night, James stood outside the guardhouse, looking up at the lit windows. Inside, 50 formerly invisible people were safe. Were seen, were healing, and tomorrow, they'd help 50 more. But the story wasn't over, because sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. 1 year after the incident in the plaza, James stood in that exact same spot. This time, he wasn't in uniform. He wore civilian clothes and stood among the crowd of tourists, just another face in the sea of people. A young guard stood at attention where James once stood, perfectly still, eyes forward. Following protocol exactly as trained, James wondered if that guard could see the invisible people walking past. Wondered if he'd learned yet that sometimes the most important duty isn't following orders, it's following your conscience. His phone rang. It was Helen from the guardhouse. James, we have a situation. Can you come back? On my way. 20 minutes later, James walked into chaos. A young woman sat in the lobby, maybe 19 years old, crying hysterically. Arthur was trying to calm her while Dr. Patel stood by with concern etched on his face. What happened? James asked. This is Emma, Arthur explained. She's not a veteran. But her father was. He took his own life 3 days ago. She found our address and his belongings and came looking for answers. Emma looked up, mascara streaking her face. He had your card, your address. But he never came here. Why didn't he come here? James sat down beside her slowly. This was the hardest part. The ones they couldn't reach. The invisible people who stayed invisible until it was too late. What was your father's name? He asked gently. Thomas. Thomas Brennan. He served in Iraq. Came back different. Mom left. I was too young to understand. He ended up on the streets. Emma's voice broke. I tried to find him. For years I tried, and when I finally did, he was already gone. James knew that name. Thomas Brennan had been on their outreach list. Arthur had tried to contact him multiple times. But some people are too hurt, too broken, too afraid to accept help. Your father was a brave man, James said, and he loved you. Whatever happened, whatever darkness he faced, that doesn't change. Then why didn't he fight harder? Why didn't he come here where people could help? It was Marcus who answered. He'd been standing in the doorway, listening. Now he walked over and knelt beside Emma. Because sometimes the pain is so loud you can't hear people calling your name, Marcus said softly. Sometimes you're so lost in the dark that you forget light exists. It's not about not fighting. It's about fighting a battle that no one else can see. Emma looked at him. Who are you? Someone who almost made the same choice your father did. Someone who was saved by a stranger who chose to see me when I was invisible. Marcus glanced at James. But you can honor his memory by making sure others are. How? By sharing his story. By helping us reach people before it's too late. By being the light For someone else who's lost in the dark. Something shifted in Emma's expression. The helpless grief transformed into purpose. Can I volunteer here? Emma, James said carefully. You should take time to grieve. To heal, I've been grieving for years. Watching him disappear piece by piece, now I want to do something that matters. Her jaw set with determination. Please, let me help. James looked at his team. They all nodded. "Okay," he said. "Welcome to the guardhouse." Emma became their most passionate advocate. She spoke at schools, at government hearings, at veteran organizations. She told her father's story and didn't let people look away. She made the invisible visible, not through rage or blame, but through truth and love. 6 months later, the guardhouse had expanded. 3 new facilities opened in other cities, just as Ms. Thornton had promised. Hundreds of veterans were being helped. Lives were being saved. But James never forgot the cost. Never forgot Thomas Brennan and all the others they couldn't reach in time. One evening, he returned to the plaza again. The guard on duty was different now. An older sergeant who James knew from his unit. The man noticed. James smiled slightly, just enough to show recognition without breaking protocol. During the changing of the guard, the sergeant walked past James and whispered, "Still checking up on us?" "Always," James replied. "We heard what you did. What you're still doing? The whole regiment knows." The sergeant paused. "You're teaching us something important. That being a guard isn't just about protecting buildings. It's about protecting people. All people. Even the ones everyone else ignores." James felt pride swell in his chest. The change was spreading. The idea that seeing the invisible mattered was taking root, as sunset painted the London sky orange and gold. James pulled out his phone and called the guardhouse. "Arthur, it's me. How's everyone?" "Good. Patricia's been sober 6 months today." "We're having cake. Robert got promoted at his job. Marcus is leading a new group session. Emma just convinced a local business to donate winter clothes." Arthur's voice was warm. "We're full, James. Every bed. And the waiting list keeps growing. And we build more. We keep going until there are no more invisible people. Until everyone has a place where they're seen. That's a big dream, son. Someone told me once that dreams don't feed hungry stomachs or warm, cold nights. But he was wrong. Dreams do feed something. They feed hope. And sometimes that's what people need most." Arthur chuckled. "You've gotten philosophical in your old age. Learn from the best." That night, James stood on Westminster Bridge and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there were people who felt invisible, who thought no one saw them, who believed the world had forgotten them. But they were wrong, because one guard had chosen to break protocol, to look at a desperate man and say, "I see you." And those 3 words had started a ripple that was still spreading, touching lives, changing systems, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of humanity create the biggest impact. Marcus joined him on the bridge, collar turned up against the cold. "You know what's strange?" Marcus said. "That day in the plaza, I thought I was at my end. Thought there was no hope left. But I was wrong. That wasn't an ending. It was a beginning." "For both of us," James agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence. 2 men who'd met in the worst possible way and ended up saving each other below them. The Thames flowed endlessly, carrying away the past and bringing in the future. And somewhere in the city, another invisible person was being seen for the first time. Another life was being saved. Another beginning was happening, because once you choose to see the invisible, you can't unsee them, and you never walk past them again. James thought about the gun pressed against his chest a year ago, about the fear, about the choice he'd made to break protocol and look a desperate man in the eyes. That choice had changed everything, not just for Marcus, not just for the hundreds of veterans now sleeping safely in guardhouse facilities across the country, but for James himself. He'd learned that being a guard meant more than standing still. It meant standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It meant seeing people, really seeing them, and once you start, you never stop. "Come on," Marcus said. Emma's expecting us. She made dinner for everyone. Says we're family now. James smiled. Family. A year ago, he'd been a solitary soldier standing at attention, trained to see nothing. Now, he was part of something bigger. Something that mattered. They walked back toward the guardhouse together. Two men who'd found purpose in the unlikeliest of places. In a moment of crisis that had become a moment of clarity. And somewhere behind them, in the plaza by Buckingham Palace, a guard stood at attention. Following protocol, standing perfectly still. But James liked to think that maybe, just maybe, that guard was also watching, seeing, noticing the invisible people walking past. Ready to break protocol when it mattered most. Ready to be human first. Soldier second. Ready to say 3 simple words that could change everything. I see you.